Our guest today is Tom Merle, General Manager of CONTINUUM Advanced Systems. Tom is responsible for managing the company business that works at the intersection of technology, systems, and human-centered design. He oversees the team that is responsible for developing systems and technologies that deliver value to people and business results to clients. Tom is also part of the executive management team of the company. While with CONTINUUM, Tom's clients have included General Dynamics, Abbott Labs, Insulet, Avedro, and Ingersoll Rand. Prior to joining CONTINUUM, he worked in research and product development at Eastman Kodak Company for more than 13 years. While at Eastman Kodak, he played a key role in product development efforts in consumer photography, office product, and government businesses, and worked closely with manufacturing partners around the world. Tom holds 23 patents in the fields of mechanical systems, photo finishing equipment, and electrophotography, and received the Distinguished Inventors Award from the CTO of Eastman Kodak. He is a member of the Industry Advisory Board for Mechanical Engineering Department at Boston University, a frequent lecturer on the topic of product innovation, and is a licensed professional engineer in New York and Massachusetts. He holds a degree in mechanical engineering from Clarkson University, where he graduated as a presidential scholar with great distinction. Please join me in welcoming Tom Merle.
Thanks so much. Thank you. Well, thank you for that. Appreciate it. It really is a pleasure to be here. I spoke to your professor a little bit about your background and the course, and it's pretty interesting. And I'll come at this, speak a little bit about just innovation design, tell you a little bit about our company and kind of philosophy. But I know there's a number of you that are technically oriented, that are in engineering schools, and talk a little bit about how the technical background can play into this industry. And it's a pretty intense, pretty energetic category of work in the innovation design space. So let me give you a little bit more background about our company, the kind of work we do, our kind of philosophy on design innovation. For those that don't know CONTINUUM, we are an innovation design consultancy. We are really about studying people. You'll see that theme through most of the conversation and presentation that I'm going to give you. Through that observation, through those learnings, we do really go to look at recognizing opportunities. That's our objective. And then we're trying to identify breakthrough ideas or concepts that can solve those problems, that can address those needs. Probably the most fundamental difference from our company and others is that we are not about creating a document set or an envisioned image or a sketch or an idea alone. What we're really committed to is making those things real. So you'll see through this, some of the examples and some of the product stories and concept stories that we're not really about think tank type attitude. It's really about creating something that's real. The business unit that I manage is CONTINUUM Advanced Systems. And as your professor described, we really work at the intersection with technology and people. So a lot of our medical device development, a lot of our technology systems development for government systems, industrial products, commercial products, even consumer products. The marriage that my particular team has is around that technology delivery in a way that people value. So I'll show you some of the examples on that. We do an awful lot of work understanding people. And we don't do that work in a conference room. We don't do it in a focus group room. We do it by going out in the world and watching people do what they do, and in many cases, watch what they don't do. So these are just some images of different contexts and different locations from, bottom left is we had some of our folks working with the National Parks Department trying to understand membership systems and how they could improve the membership experience. Bottom right is a study we did with BMW to try and understand how people use their time, spend their time in a car, looking at different systems and minimizing distractions. And you can ask somebody what they do in the car and they will tell you, and you can watch what they do in the car and you'd be really afraid because the last thing they're doing is watching the road and keeping an eye on traffic. So being in the context, being in the back seat, being able to videotape and ask questions is an incredibly powerful way to actually learn the context. I'd love to say we're a nonprofit and that we are happy to do work for free, but the reality is that we have a lot of really important clients who have really important problems, and at the end of the day, they are looking to have some level of business success. Yes, they want to position themselves in the market to be successful, but there is an element about sustained business. And so we're proud of being able to be involved with solutions and products and systems that are actually good for people and good for business. So a few recognizable and maybe not so recognizable, but to give you a little bit of breath, back in the 80s, we were the company that teamed up with Reebok to do the original Reebok pump sneaker. And it's been reintroduced, and probably your generation now knows of the pump, but back when it was originally introduced, Nike had just come out with the Air Jordan sneaker and basically had taken the market. And Reebok was in desperate need to reinvent something, to create something of value that the consumer, the users would find interesting. We happened to be working on a blood pressure cuff for a medical device company at the time, and did some research with some kids in Newton North High School, watched them play basketball, made up some samples, some prototypes, created bladders in the sneaker. They found it incredibly compelling that they could actually customize the fit of their sneaker on the fly, during the game, in the practice. And half the kids wanted us to leave the prototypes because they really loved them. So spawned from the idea of changing the experience, the fit, was a very flexible new product, and it basically doubled the size of Reebok. So it was a big deal. Probably your mom's sisters, grandmothers, maybe even you have a Swiffer someplace, so that's one of our probably most well-known products we did with Procter & Gamble. Again, it was kind of the marriage of how do people clean their floors, how do people take care of their home, what are they proud of, and then doing time studies to realize they spend more time cleaning the mop than they did cleaning the floor. And you start to think about Procter & Gamble, the company, and they have some of the best chemical engineers on the planet, and they're very used to making materials with chemicals on it, kind of like Pampers. So they were very happy to be thinking about how woven material, consumables, and floor cleaning could be innovated, and that created a $1 billion category for Procter & Gamble. And now you see the spawn of wet jets and all kinds of spin-off kind of products. But the original Swiffer technology work and design work we did at CONTINUUM. Other examples with Master Lock, a few on the lower section. Again, getting into the medical space, we've done a lot in the diabetes space. Insulet, I'll talk about at some level of detail, and then in the showering category for Moen. So it's a pretty broad range. We don't have one industry, one category, one part of the innovation space, and it's amazing how applicable the tools and approaches really are to different kinds of problems. Lots of different companies, some you'll recognize, some you won't, but we've been around for 30 years as a company. We have offices here in Boston, in LA, in Shanghai, Milan, and in Seoul, Korea. So we're an international company, global company, and we use that presence to make sure that the solutions we're working on are applicable to the regions that matter, because we can't expect that something designed for the United States is well positioned for China. But it's also nice to have a mix of international, global design thinkers involved with the process. So we do have a lot of collaboration between our offices and studios to make sure we're delivering, really the best of the best for the clients. It's a pretty eclectic kind of place. I'll show you some images of kind of both socials and activities, but it's a pretty eclectic group of professionals in our company. We have folks that range from industrial design to anthropology. We have some architecture folks, we have interaction, graphics designers, engineers, human factors specialists, prototype specialists, envisioners, and for us that's a really unique kind of skill of being able to take an early idea and visualize it, sketch it, create it so that it can be communicated. Very strong technical capabilities, electrical software. So it's a broad mix of people foundationally connected with the idea that collaboration of those disciplines is really important, and that if we can thematically kind of approach what we do based on the learnings from the people that will use this, that we really can get a lot of energy from the success. So just a few pictures of you know, kind of culture and space, and we, I don't know what kind of projects you do as groups, but for our company, we have a very much a war room mentality to the project work we do. So top left is basically when you're involved with a program that each of those teams gets assigned a space, and that space is their home. And in that home are the doodles and Post-its and the half-baked ideas and the quick conversations, and all of that's kind of recorded in a very live environment, so that it's something that's constantly being matured and evolved. And that's kind of the immersion people have into the workspace that they're involved with. And then you'll see just some pictures of, you know, our model shop in the bottom left, and we actually did some work with LL Bean a couple of years ago. Does anyone remember Design Squad? Did you ever see that show on TV? We hosted one of the finishing episodes of Design Squad at our facility, and the contest was to build a luge that would go down a grass hill. And it happened to be in a bad time of year where there wasn't much grass, so we decided to build the ramp in our facility. So we actually brought in a big load of turf and sod and built a ramp, and it was pretty cool. But that bottom right picture is actually the construction of the ramp that we put together. Again, this is more about the environment, kind of the space, the mentality of people in this world, in this kind of creative culture. A lot of time spent after hours hosting events, bringing other design thinkers in, having the teams meet in a kind of a social setting. So it's definitely something that you can make just a job, or you can make it something that is kind of an enjoyable experience as a part of the team. I'm going to show you a couple frameworks, just because I'm sure as you're thinking about your trajectory as professionals and the schooling you're going through, and you know, how does this all connect? There's a lot of different models out there about how do you connect the dots here, so that there's a value proposition that makes sense for a buyer, a user, a consumer. How does it feel if you're one of the creators, a designer of these solutions? And what about the business? Because again, there's the sad realities of, you know, companies that are trying to be in that innovative space and create solutions that people value. They need to stay in business. So how do you create some value with that? So these are just some quick examples of, you know, the different perspectives as these different parts of the process evolve. So, you know, designers think about creating lust. They create that desire that people want, and you want the consumer to feel that. You want them to have that reaction, and that can really separate yourself in the business world. So you could command a premium share. That could be the part of the market that you actually command. You try to communicate the benefits. How do you do that as a designer or engineer or an innovator? And you do that in a way that people get the value. You know, it's an actual perceived value. And if you can do that, then you can command a premium price. We see that all around us all the time with different products. As a designer, you try to figure out, how do I communicate the use? This is a big deal today. People are becoming completely intolerant of difficult to use products. And it's not because the instructions are bad, because those already got tossed out with the box. It's really the intuitive ability to know, how do I use this? And you know, for a consumer, they know it. They know the instinctual kind of navigations or decisions or next steps, kind of the thought architecture that plays out. And if you can do that, you know, you can actually start to associate people being loyal to your brand, loyal to your company. And then, you know, finally, there are flat out problems that need to be solved. And, you know, sometimes those are difficult, but you want to do it in an efficient way. You want to do it in a low cost way. And if you can get that LED screen to be a little bit more efficient, a little bit cheaper, a little bit faster, then you can actually command a higher margin. So again, kind of the business perspective on this. So that's one kind of way to think about the different stakeholders and the connections. Another is, and I'm sure you hear this phrase or this category of expression, but at the end of the day, we all are really compelled by great experiences. And that can be in a hotel, that can be in a hospital, that can be in an airplane, that can be dealing with your phone, it can be watching a television show on demand, whatever it is. And there's a zone where that all works. And we kind of like to put where the exclamation point is, that there's a contextual element to this, where is this happening, how is it happening? Ideas are great, but ideas alone don't necessarily solve it all, because there's a lot of great ideas, but the context and design of it, the execution of it aren't great. But if you can get the design right, if you can get the idea right, and you really do understand the context of use, the context of execution on how people will enjoy this particular experience, then you've really kind of hit the mark. And if you think about it, we could all consider ourselves experienced designers. That's an engineer or an industrial designer or an architect or a business major. We're trying to find a way that experience is something that tangibly is valued, and if it's valued, people will pay for it. Last thing is, there's kind of the pragmatic and there's the emotional side to this process. You can always kind of look at something and say, the problem is I don't have enough battery life on my phone. True. But you can also look at the value side of it and say, well, why does that matter? Well, because I might be in the middle of a conversation, or I might need to take that picture when I really need it, or there's some other part of this that is about the values, aspirations, and experience that the people side, the emotional side, really drives people's willingness and interest to buy into something or to find an idea really valuable. So our kind of philosophy on that is that it's not just solving the problem, but if you can solve the problem and appeal to and understand the values that drive somebody, that really is important. And I'll just use the Swiffer for a second, because you're probably all familiar with that. So the problem is, cleaning a hardwood floor is kind of a pain in the ass, really. I mean, it's not easy to do. You don't want to get the vacuum out. You don't want to deal with, get down on your hands and knees. The mop's kind of overkill. So how do you do that? And a lot of people when we went to their homes and did research on that, they weren't really about cleaning the floor. They were really about being proud of their home. They were really about being proud of how clean and how receptive it feels when somebody walks in and they see a well-kept, inviting kind of environment. It might actually be that they got kids crawling around and they don't want dirt on the floor. So there's a health, take care of my family piece of it. That's not solving the dirt problem, but you actually can kind of marry those two things together and say, well, it's about speed, it's about cleanliness, it's about someone before, when the doorbell rings or someone's on their way over for a surprise visit, pulling a Swiffer out of the closet and doing literally a 2-minute cleanup is something that's really, really valued. So it kind of brought together the idea, found an intersection between the two aspects or 2 points of view. Again, there's lots of schools of thought out there about innovation, and it's a big word and a big industry and lots of discussion. We kind of break it down into 3 kind of inspiring points, like what is really could bring you to a place of true innovation. And the 3 legs of that really are the people, the users. There's an awful lot of great technology out there that actually can inspire an innovation. Because of this technology, I can now think differently. And there are some that are just flat out business opportunity. I see an opportunity to change the way business works in this category. But of the three, it's my personal bias, it's our company's personal bias, that the biggest element that can foundationally give you a strong core confident direction is by understanding people. I talked about Swiffer a fair amount. I'm just going to flip quickly through a breadth of examples just to show you range, and I may do just a couple voiceovers just to add a little bit of context. This is a project we did for American Express, a concept project for a folding credit card. And for many of you who probably leave your dorm or leave your apartment and you take your key and you take your computer and that's about it, you might not have cash, you might not have your credit card. What do you do with your credit card? Do I need to bring my purse? Do I need to bring my wallet? So this idea was that you could actually take a current credit card by adding some pretty interesting technology and materials to allow for the membrane between the actual full-size credit card to fold in half, and then put it in a keychain, basically, so you carry one thing. Also was removable so the credit card could be swiped if you needed to do it. So it was a pretty, again, for American Express, they're trying to drive utilization of the card, right? So the business is good if people use the card more often. But from a consumer side, we really learned a lot about how people today handle purchases, how transactions happen. Many of you probably know a little bit about the One Laptop Per Child program, or the MIT $100 laptop program several years ago. Dr. Negroponte at MIT was the lead advocate for this. We were involved in the early stages of trying to understand how children, students would use this and do it in a way, and communicate it in a way that was both playful, approachable, but serious enough that it truly was a learning tool. This was a pretty cool program we did with Starbucks and a major beverage company to create a hot beverage dispensing system. And again, this is all about, and it was kind of directed at college campuses. So at 11:30 at night when Starbucks is closed, or 2 in the morning when you just need to get a Starbucks coffee, this was actually a device that wasn't the mix of hot water with bad coffee approach. This was actually good coffee in a contained vessel that was heated through a very novel kind of heating technology. So it was embedded behind the scenes, was a pretty cool heating technology to drive it. But from a user interaction, it was to deliver a beverage on site on demand. We did some work for Moen, may know that company through, they sell a lot of products through Home Depot and make a lot of plumbing and fixtures and faucets for the consumer market. They needed to reinvent the shower, and it seems strange to think about that, but the shower is kind of a unique experience for people during the day, either the morning shower or after a run shower or relax before bed shower, and trying to understand the science of water, the delivery of water, the temperature, the size of the drops, the coverage on your body, what sensations you feel, is it relaxing, can I wash my hair, all these kind of combinations of emotional and real needs. And we discovered some pretty interesting things, that people generally want to have more flexibility in the delivery of water than they currently have. The 8 settings on that water pick unit that you have, only 2 of them you probably use, and the rest of them you're not too interested in. And every time you change the setting, you spray the ceiling because that's the way the controls are designed. And it's hard to tell what you're doing if you wear glasses because you don't know where you are. So this whole combination of changing the controls, you can see here the controls are in the bottom, out of the water stream. There are no detents, so it's fine-tunable. You can kind of adjust it a little bit or tweak it a little bit, and it changes the size of the drops, and it changes the dispersion of water. Can go from a waterfall feel to more of an aggressive kind of cleaning delivery of water. But that crazy contraption on the side was a Frankenstein shower head we built, basically, that allowed for independent control. Like, you could change these 3 settings independently of each other: the drop size, the velocity of the water, and the coverage on your body. And by doing that, we asked people to take that home and try it, and then we recorded where the settings were. And our hope was we'd get this back and say, oh, everybody liked this, everybody liked that, everybody liked this. This is easy, we'll make 3 or 4 settings, no problem. what it came back was an amazingly dispersed scatter plot of where people had those settings. So the aha moment was, okay, well, we're no smarter than anybody else that's ever designed a shower head to say, these are the 5 settings you get, and tough luck, that's all you get. So it steered us to finding a way to deliver a tunable, and it's really the only one we've ever seen that has kind of a tunable characteristic that you can actually adjust, customize exactly to the way you want the water to be delivered. Switching gears completely, we've done work with General Dynamics here in Massachusetts. They make a lot of communications control systems for the military, particularly for the Humvee, for the interior communication systems. And as we all know, and we hear the stories of roadside bombs and improvised explosive devices, there's a lot of concern when there is an event like that to get the soldiers out of the vehicles. And sadly, it's not always the most well-integrated system, because the Army buys a vehicle, and then the vehicle goes over to the weapons company, and they put the weapons in, and then the air conditioning company puts the air conditioning in, and then the communications company puts the communication systems in. And by the time you're done, you've got vents and ducts and wires and cables all over the place, and to actually get out of that vehicle is really, really hard if you're a big soldier and you're wearing a pack and the vehicle's on its side. So what we started to look at was, let's talk about the environment, let's see what the conditions are, let's really look at the systems internally, and then the front picture is actually a facility that General Dynamics has down in Taunton, where they had commanders coming back from Iraq who knew the environment incredibly well, and we started to mock up ideas. So those white blocks are foam core models of different combinations of displays and retraction systems, so you can get them out of the way, much better integrated into the vehicle architecture. So it was kind of rethinking the safety and egress of the environment by looking specifically at the integration of General Dynamics systems into the Humvee. Very, very well received. The Army is right now kind of assessing how many vehicles they'll retrofit with these kind of changes. So, a big deal, but in a completely different category. Again, kind of switching gears to the world of pure science. So we've done a lot of work in the genomics category, DNA analysis, DNA testing, cancer detection. And again, the picture on the left is the lab down at BU in the Photonics Center, and the device on the right is making it real. So those ended up in Johns Hopkins and a couple other research institutes doing cancer research. Talk a little bit about a ophthalmic project we did, and so I'll warn you that I'm going to show a gross eye picture in a second, so if you don't like that, don't look. So some of you someday may need to have LASIK surgery. Sorry about that, I probably will too. But we've actually worked with a local startup company that has licensed a technology that uses RF energy, and it applies that energy onto the eye, no incisions, and it changes the molecular structure of the collagen in your eye to reshape the cornea. The beauty of this is that it's actually tunable, so you can go for one treatment. If it's not quite right, they can do it again. And it's semi-permanent, which also means that if it degrades over time, you can actually go back and get it adjusted again. So it's being very, very well received, being launched in Europe first. Our role was really from beginning to end trying to understand on the right-hand series of pictures what happens in an ophthalmic surgical environment. How much space do they have? What's the nurse's role? What's the doctor's role? What's the interface design? And then the electrical, you'll see some of our team actually putting together the details of the design. Okay, I'm going to go really quick for a few and then probably wrap up the next 5 or 10 minutes. This is a pediatric sedation device. This was funded by the National Institutes of Health. Basically, if you're a kid going in to have your tonsils out, or you need to have your ears checked, or some in-office procedure, and you need some level of sedation, not complete sedation, but just relaxation, your only alternative is to lay on the table with the bright lights and have this big black adult-sized mask come on your face and try to relax you. Nothing could do less than to see all that happening around you. So this was basically a more playful design of something that the kids would see as something kind of designed for them. And all it did basically was deliver some level of nitrous oxide, laughing gas, scavenge that, but let the kids get relaxed. And when they walk in the doctor's office, they immediately see something that's designed for them. Between the color, design, they immediately recognize there's a language there that speaks to them. You know, and these kind of things start with architecture models. Does it fit? Where does the nose go? Where does the ear cuffs go? You know, we get into the foams and form design to see if it's right. You know, does it feel right? Jump that into CAD because we need to get it real, and then make some parts and build this. So we built about 12 of these that are currently being tested at the University of Toronto Hospital to assess this. Again, it's a NIH-funded activity, so the end result is this point, and now we're hoping that a commercial partner will embrace it. I'll go super quick through this one case study we did with Insulet. I don't know if there are any type 1 diabetics in the room, but you probably know someone who is a type 1 diabetic. There's no argument that the treatment of the disease is best served by using pump therapy. And pump therapy basically means that there's a continuous delivery of insulin to replicate more closely the pancreas and how that works in your body. The problem with current pumps, and there are many on the market, is that they're very difficult to use. They are, if you have any dexterity or vision problems, they're very hard because of the navigation ability. They're also pretty intrusive. You've got this site on your body where you have the insertion of a plastic cannula, a plastic tube. It's kind of hard to hide the thing. If you're in a restaurant or you're in a public setting or one of the Northeastern hockey games and you need to change your insulin delivery, you have to remove this from your belt. You need to visibly make that change. And pretty much everybody around you who didn't know before knows you got something wrong. That's not a great feeling in many settings. And as a patient, as someone with a lifelong management of the disease, it's a pretty difficult situation. So we worked with a local company to change the paradigm completely, break it apart. Today, the control in the pump is all one unit, and what we did was move to separate the two. Make the pump a disposable that gets attached to your body, and make the controller a reusable piece that is much more discreet, much more conducive to lifestyle. And we began that process, and again, it started with a startup company with 3 people, and they hired our company to basically be their development partner. And with all programs, we start at the beginning. So we talk to moms, we talk to patients, we talk to kids, we talk to nurse practitioners, nurse educators. We immerse ourselves in the experience. We inject ourselves with insulin and with saline to try to see what kind of reaction there will be, what the sites, the pains. Trying to look at the thematic pieces of this. How do we unravel this into a manageable program? Again, getting into concepts. So we know we're going to have 2 discrete parts of the system now, a disposable piece and a reusable piece. And at the time, you know, the emergence of cell phones and PDAs and organizers was right on the verge. So we had to find this careful line of it being a serious product, not necessarily medical, but not necessarily consumer in a playful sense. So we needed to have that marriage of serious, definitely have a communication that integrates into people's lives, but it couldn't be too medical. So we had to do, you know, kind of thoughtfully work through that. Storyboarding how people will use it, the hard work of electrical software, firmware, flow charts to make sure that the navigation of this makes sense. How do we want to structure the controls? 2 knobs, 3 knobs, 4 knobs, up, down knobs. So all the interaction design to make sure that, again, from a dexterity, visual perspective, people can make best use of this. And then, I spoke a little bit about the refinement. So how do we, materials, colors, communication, screen size, screen shape, screen color, all decisions that can be made. And again, knowing that we have spoken and immersed ourselves in the context of this use, it informed the whole process. So none of us actually had type 1 diabetes, but we felt like we were empathetic to that user, to that person. And so those kind of cues were important as we designed it. An awful lot of cool science and engineering under the hood. A unique drive system using nitinol wire, which for those that know is a really unique material that if you heat and cool it, it can actually create a force. And so that's what actually drives the ratchet system in here. We removed the whole trauma of the needle insertion because you have to move this cannula around every 3 days. So there's an automatic insertion and it controls exactly the depth that needs to happen so you never overshoot and the pain basically goes away. Battery operated, sleep states, custom radio systems so you only talk to your pod, you don't talk to someone else in the restaurant. And then the kind of hard pieces of making it real. So electrical hardware design, board design, software, materials. This is a good example of kind of understanding how users and the range of ideas you could come up with kind of play out. So we could have pursued something that you put this pod on your body, you manually push something to insert the cannula, or we could go to the other extreme and say that this is going to be fully automatic. It's going to be completely embedded into the system. Yes, it's a little more complex, but from a user perspective, a huge win. Removed a huge part of the trauma of dealing with the 3-day cycle of moving the site for delivery of the insulin. A couple more examples of electrical boards starting to move towards the final product. Again, kind of under the hood, what really makes this tick. And then, the final product was on the left, the white piece is actually the disposable. So you fill that with a 3-day supply of insulin. You peel off the backing, you attach it to your body, and you can put it in many positions because it's more adaptable. And the product in the other hand is basically the controller. And that's the kind of thing that you would pull out in the restaurant. And people wouldn't necessarily know if that's a phone or some other piece of personal gear, and you can make a very quick change because you just had a really good meal and nobody really knows the difference. So from a lifestyle perspective, we went from being able to say that I'm sick, which is kind of what happens with the current systems, as opposed to feeling like, I'm a little bit like you. I'm not really that different. It's been really well received. They've gone through an IPO. They've got 300 employees, FDA registered for adults and pediatric patients, now looking at other drugs that can be delivered through this product. So it's a really proud story for us in how you can start with really a problem and then a kind of a core idea and then move that all the way through to something that's real, that really changes people's lives and can create some value, business value. So that's a bit of a summary of our take on the innovation design space.
I think of the guests we've had thus far, you hit on more of the key words that we've been talking about without any prompting than anyone has. I mean, this is, the business you guys are in, I think, is very, very much at the core of what this course is about. And we have, it's a constellation of things, but I think at the core is this kind of very self-conscious thinking about how you're making decisions, how you're making design decisions. So let's start sort of maybe at a more general place and we can get more specific, but firms like CONTINUUM, IDEO, and others are breaking ground, it seems to me, at the intersection of human behavior, but also design, engineering, branding, data visualization, marketing, and I guess, product development as well. But it seems like this is a business type that has emerged in the last I mean, your company is 30 years old, but nevertheless, it feels like the last 10 or 15 years is when this has really taken off.
Yeah.
How do you account for that?
Yeah, it's, I think you're absolutely right. And I actually have to say, and I will promise only use this maybe 2 times, but I think over the years, and through the evolution of usage of products, through some combination of good design, good practices, people have learned what a good experience is really all about. And it might have been as simple as the dashboard design in that car you bought. It might have been that chair that you bought that you really enjoy the way the fit is or the controls are. And I think over a bit of time, people have really realized that I don't have to suffer with this. I don't have to have a bad experience or interaction with something. And Apple has probably done more to give people a reason to believe that I can have what I want and have a good experience at the same time. I think probably the biggest thing we've seen happen in our space over the last few years is in the medical space. There was a time when people didn't care how much it hurt, how much it cost, how long it took. If it made them feel better, if they were healthier, it didn't really matter. And the whole industry kind of took that attitude. Yeah, it's too long. Yeah, it's too big. Yeah, it's kind of clunky. It's no fun to have a mammogram. You know, all these things, it's all part of health. But today, the consumer is now the patient. And they are in a much, much different space. They don't want the hospital experience to be awful. They don't want the doctor's experience to be something that's really horrific or painful. So I think the whole migration the last 10, 15, 20 years is that the consumers have woken up to the idea that they can have it all. They can have a great solution, and they can have something they actually enjoy.
Right. Well, and your value proposition slide, I think, maybe is evidence that this is not just charity on the part of firms, that they can actually increase the value of their products disproportionately to the way, maybe to the investment in other words, it's not making it gold-plated.
Right.
It's not filling the screen with diamonds.
Right.
It's making, but people will actually pay for a better experience. And if you can do that and scale it, so you put all that energy into the prototype for the insulin delivery system, and that's a tremendous amount of work. But then there's 1 million or 2 million of them, and suddenly it's really, really worth it.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's this is where design is embedding itself more self-consciously in our lives. If it weren't for firms like CONTINUUM and IDEO, I wouldn't be teaching this course, actually. Yeah. Somebody like me wouldn't be teaching this course. It might be somebody in marketing from the business school, or it might be somebody in product design from the engineering school. But in truth, these things are all kind of coming together, which is really interesting. You gave us some examples of the broad range of challenges that clients bring to you. So, I mean, I think in a way I was going to ask you about that, but it's, everything from Swiffer to medical delivery to all these other things. So I want to ask you something, another broader question that is, I think, that every student in here can relate to. This generation, more than ours, has been inundated with technology from the very get-go, no question about it. But they're also acutely aware, unless their lives are just completely different than mine, of a kind of ambivalence about the ubiquity of technology today. The coffee shop I go to, that some of these people may go to, is called Pavement, and it's a hipster coffee shop at which middle-aged people are still somehow welcome. And it is extremely self-conscious about having the opposite of highly polished, modern feel to it. I would say if it is appealing to a particular epoch, it would be about 1890. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The baristas have the handlebar mustaches. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? The single-speed bicycles, the very self-conscious efforts to somehow resist the total domination, having our lives completely dominated by technology. It would seem to me for people focused on human experience that this must enter your world a little bit. In other words, there's so much technology, yet immediately we want to move towards a technological answer. But then when you do not a focus group, but when you do your experience study, can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned the global piece a little bit because that kind of is it's a placeholder for a bigger topic, and this is kind of getting at it. I mean, I think one of the hardest things you will ever do if you're in the design space is realize at some point, and this is so hard to do, realize that you're probably not designing for you. And that's really hard because you want to like what you worked on. You really want to say, I would love to use that thing. But, and the reality is that different generations, different categories, segments, if you will, of the world, population, are completely tuned differently to how the technology piece plays in. And, the ubiquity of it, to me, right now, there's an acceptance of technology, but I don't really want to know about it. All I care about is the face in front of it, the interaction I have with it. But there's a lot of nostalgic feel today. There's a lot of Schwinn bicycles floating around, and there's the Converse sneakers are back, and but that's a generational thing too. So I think the big message is that as hard as it is to resist, and believe me, probably the hardest conversations are standing in front of a CEO of a big company where they say, I don't like that. And we say, it doesn't really matter. Right. It doesn't really matter what you like because that's not the target. That's not who's we're trying to make understand the value for this. And it is true that generations, regional sensitivities, countries, gender, it's all really important because it all is a little bit different.
Right. This is great stuff because, for several reasons. One of our 8 key words is, of course, empathy. And I just was meeting with my friend Peter Dixon, a guest in the class last spring, whom I was mentioning to you previously, who says he's the creative director at a major brand and identity firm called Prophet, Prophet, in New York City. And they're really brilliant at what they do. And I was so moved by his reference to the term empathy as being probably the most important thing in his professional life. And that is not the word I would have guessed. Might have been creativity. It might have been, cleverness or but it was empathy. And, as an architect, boy, do I take what you just said. I don't want to say there's 2 kinds of architects, but there might almost be those who understand that they have clients and those who simply have to find people who like what they like. It's a different thing.
Absolutely.
And that's really the question about whether, and by the way, one audience, spoiler alert, is way bigger than the other. Right? The audience that needs customized solutions is way bigger than the audience of people who happens to be exactly like you, coincidentally.
The days of design what you like and they will come is basically over with. And the second part of the whole consumer evolution is that businesses are finally starting to wake up to say, wow, it's not about the number of features we have or how many switches or the speed of our printer or how many pictures we can hold. People are really sensitive to a whole lot more than that, and they'll pay for it. Like if you're a business person, you say, well, I want better margins, I want bigger revenue, I want bigger numbers, and they're finding out that design, the tool of design, is a huge business tool. It's not the designers will come in and sprinkle a little bit to clean it up or make it pretty or figure out a color. No, that whole design process, creating something that people look at emotionally, and the value in their mind has just risen because of that experience. Starting from the place you bought it, to the box you got it in, to the way you received it, to the turn-on experience, I mean, all of it, they're starting to realize, holy cow, people will pay more if that's better. And that's a monstrous shift in the business world where it might have been for years to just drop the cost, we'll move to a different country to build it. If they're 6 feet a minute, we're going to go 7. The whole chasing of feeds and speeds is really not, it's not the game anymore.
You know, that raises two very good examples for me. One is just the whole idea of not just experience design, but a tool towards designing experiences, which I'm curious, I assume you guys make use of the so-called experience map, the idea of mapping an experience from start to finish, and you do your research maybe on an experience map. Last semester we talked about an experience map of Starbucks, just because it's such a self-consciously, it's not an accident. It didn't just turn out that way, that when you sell coffee, that's what they end up looking like.
Yeah.
Nothing could be further from the truth.
Right.
It's like, okay, you park in the parking lot. Now, what do you see when you see the Starbucks store if it's a suburban one? Or what do you see walking down the street when you walk in and you know there's going to be a line? What are my experiences along the line? A whole sequence of things I can experience while I'm checking out, while I'm paying. How is
exactly.
Now, can you talk about some other experiences that you guys have thought about in that sort of disaggregated way?
Yeah. Well, the term we use, which is probably similar to what you're describing, is a journey map.
A journey map.
So the journey map is that exact kind of navigation mapping. What we oftentimes try to complement that with is trying to then associate with the journey better understanding of the interactions. So what's happening at each of those points along the journey, and who's doing what? What's the passive element of communication that's happening, and what's the active? So you engage the barista, you're now dealing with the person. Up until that point, what led you to that next point of decision making? So you can kind of take that journey map and break it down into interaction, what happens, and then ultimately kind of decision, because there are parts along that journey that you're making a decision. Do I go in here? Do I go there? Wayfinding, design of the interior. I mean, these are all things that done well are really, really purposeful. Done poorly, again, I think people have become, today's consumer is really not appreciating under-designed experiences.
Yeah, you're so right. You're so right. And if you guys need more examples, how many of you have ever been at an airport where Virgin Airlines flies out? Okay, not too many. But they are probably, of contemporary airlines, the most self-conscious about experience design. Others are now trying to copy them and say, oh, no, we'll give you a ride to the airport also in a custom kind of vehicle. The idea being, you know what, for Virgin, the experience actually doesn't even begin at your house. It begins on the web or wherever you encounter them, and they try to make it as seamless and positive at every touch point.
Yeah.
And they think about which are the ones we have control over. And this is where it gets tricky, especially in the airline industry with security and everything. Which ones do we have control over, and which ones can we just try to downplay until we get you to another great experience?
Yeah, exactly.
But it's a whole different way of thinking about this kind of management decision. And I want to maybe frame this another way. Toyota is famous for the so-called lean manufacturing system. So this is about really finding a way to produce vehicles as super efficiently. And I would say experience design is sort of the same mindset, but brought not to the standpoint of the producer, but from the standpoint of the consumer. It's like mapping their experience just as specifically, except it's not about efficiency necessarily, it's about pleasure or happiness or whatever the deliverable might be.
Yeah, absolutely. And it has become more encompassing. So it isn't just that I enjoy the computer. It's that, and we're actually doing an awful lot of work with companies on their web, the web side of things, because many times one of the kind of remaining connection points is through help desks or help and service, or for banking particularly. We're doing a lot of work in the banking industry, and that whole service experience, the whole go to the bank branch is going away, and they're kind of forcing it they put the check machine, so you just deposit your check outside. You don't even have to go in and talk to anybody anymore. So, that whole, you're right. I mean, the journey from beginning to end is starting earlier and ending later. And the more of that they can capture and say, we've delivered it. And again, I hate to be pragmatic about it, but Virgin's not doing that because they're nice people or they're really thoughtful, or they're doing it because it's building brand loyalty. People now, we're talking about them, so you guys probably will maybe look on the website and say, what are we talking about? And truly, if you had a preference, and if I had a preference to fly to LA today, and I could fly, another airline or Virgin, I would fly Virgin, because it's easy to get my food. I like the whole atmosphere of it is very embracing, engaging, and I think we're getting to the place where if you're not playing like that, if you're not in that zone, people have lots of good choices, lots of ideas, lots of things I can do to solve my what I need to do.
Because you guys are so in this conversation and you deal with a lot of products and everything, and the engineering and side especially well, perhaps this example will be meaningful to you. In the first lecture in this course, I tried to frame this larger discussion, and we'll see. I'll ask them all at the end of the course whether I did so with any success. But I should probably be testing all the way through so I can get better as I go if I were designing a good experience. But the business about audio devices, that we traced the arc of what is a music player. And it started with maybe, we didn't start with a piano or a drum or something like that, but with a Victrola, and then first it was a novelty, then it was a piece of furniture, then it was maybe a portable, or then it was a fixed thing, then a portable thing, and then finally, it became a boombox. And I wanted to pause at the boombox moment for just a second because it's so clarifying about whether you're looking at the product from I'm going to deliver more and more capability no matter what the consumer needs, or I'm going to innovate around the consumer experience. So let's take everyone back to like the late 70s and early 80s, right before the Walkman happened. Boomboxes first they were just portable cassette players, then they got a little bit bigger. Then they said, okay, how about big speakers? How about 2 tape decks? And pretty soon it was like Homer Simpson's car. It was starting to get an awful lot of stuff that you really didn't need in it, but they just kept saying, we'll provide more and more capacity. And then someone came out and looked at the problem differently and said, how about if you can just listen to music by yourself? And it was like the most, pre-Apple, I would say the Walkman was probably the most revolutionary consumer thing.
It was. I mean, and you're right. That was kind of my point about the feeds and speeds model. So and again, I would have to say this is probably a bit of the evolution of design too, like the industrial design category. There's an awful lot of jokes today about the bling that ended up going on to those products because it was more plastic, bigger plastic, more visual cues that you were getting lots of sound because it was silver and big and loud, and if one tape deck's good, then 2 are better, and I can tape to tape, and I can plug in my CD player, and it's like, and then they can separate so you can put them apart. It just went on and on and on, and then I think it reached a point to say, well, nobody's buying them. It's how far can this go? And then there was a paradigm shift. And maybe it was, good for Sony. At the time, they saw, transistor radios were always around, but this was a time where you say, can you change the mode of use in a dramatic way, like a paradigm shift? And truly, that probably only came if they were, I don't know the story behind the Walkman, but I would say that if they followed the story to say, I'm now, back then, the portability of music was on cassette tapes. CDs were not really there yet, and they weren't recordable. at the time when they first came out. So this was the only way to record music from an album and walk around with it. And you could walk around and put it in your boombox or put it in your car. Well, somebody probably thought, well, I'd like to walk out on the beach with my music too. Like, how could I do that? Well, and I'm sure on the technical side, you said, well, that's a no-brainer. We got the motors, we got the batteries, we can do this. And so was born this whole, mode of use that didn't exist before.
That's what makes it so cool, is that it wasn't contingent upon a technical innovation in the slightest.
Yeah.
It was just reassembling the parts.
Yeah.
And what is that but design?
Yeah. And you probably would only, I don't know what spawned it, but I would venture to say that didn't get spawned out of the R&D group. That probably got spawned out of some commissioned activity or some very smart, forward-looking marketing business person who said, well, there's an unmet need here. There's an unmet category of use that nobody's addressing. And for us, in the way we work, that would have come out of stitching together conversation pieces. People may not have come out flat and said, I'd love to walk around the beach with my music on a little machine. But they might have said, it's frustrating that I can only listen to this thing in my car and at home. That might have been the cue to say, well, what do you mean by that? Like, what else could you do? Well, I don't know. At the basketball game, or I'm waiting for the doctor's office, whatever it is.
Right. Well, it's we already talked about the empathy bit, but this is, of course, about questioning the question. This is the bit about making sure that you're being as critical and analytical about the problem that you have been given or the question that you have been assigned as you are about anything else. Yeah. I mean, about technical solutions. Let me ask you another question. In the sort of realm of experience design, what's the best one that you've been associated with, or that you admire the most? In other words, when you think about the arc of an experience for a product, for a service, of course, experience design, extends now certainly to the interface that a third of the people in this class are on right now, which is the internet. And so they're experiencing either a good site or a bad one, and that's part of maybe something that's connected to things in real life or not.
Well, I'll use it only because for me, and part of the reason I'm in the category of business I'm in is that when you can associate a great experience with a true health medical benefit for somebody, it's kind of a super win. I mean, it's arguable, and I actually am in the camp that I think this is quality of life kind of stuff, that you can look at consumer products and say, that's a really enjoyable experience for somebody. That's a quality of life thing. That streaming Netflix movie on my portable device, that's something I, as a person, get some value out of, and I feel good about that kind of thing. But I was pretty actively involved with the Insulet project, and we were kind of toying with the idea that this really could change lives. Like the quality of a diabetic's life could be changed if we do this right. And the promise of that ability was really kind of compelling. It was kind of in those darkest days when it looked like it wasn't going to work, or you kept reminding yourself that this could actually change an adoption rate, a way that people will be treating themselves for years and years and years to come, and may prevent them onset of some of the later stage difficulties with diabetes if done right. So for me as a designer engineer, that was probably the most compelling program I've been on. Right. But I'm a strong admirer of lots of good experiences. I appreciate getting into a car and realizing that, and maybe I'm fortunate because I'm about 5'11", and I'm probably the right in the middle of the bell curve of whatever they try to design cars for. But I've gotten into some vehicles, and I just am absolutely amazed with the level of thought that was put into the whole interior experience, from positions and angles and colors, and it's done right. It's an amazing kind of feeling.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. The business about that you showed at the very beginning about the testing what people say they do in cars versus What they actually do, I think, is particularly illustrative of this kind of work. In other words, it is not enough to simply, well, I asked the people and they said they do this. Well, they're going to, people, you all know, people say things.
Yeah.
They're not always true. They might even think they're true.
Yeah.
We are not as self-conscious and self-aware as we think we are. And there's myriad examples of this, where polling data and actual data diverge enormously. I got a kick out of one of the images showed somebody driving with a little tiny dog, kind of practically talking to them. Yeah. and I thought, having to design a mass-produced product like a car when we had Henrik Fisker here, he talked about how there are certain longer wheelbase models of cars for the China market right now, because at this moment in the China economy, a lot of people can afford to have a driver, and so therefore the owner sits in the back and not in the front, and therefore that changes everything.
Yeah.
But this, having to map a whole bunch of experiences on a single product that's simply too expensive to offer in infinitely customizable forms. Do you know what I'm saying? And like, for example, people in the audience here have cell phones, many of which have unique covers and cases and things. But for a car, you can have different color interior, you can have leather, you can have velour, and so forth. But at the end of the day, the whole premise is all that design energy is paid for by having 100,000 units that are pretty much the same. Yeah,
that's for sure. I think, again, even for the, you're right. I mean, you're not, although you got lots of, and actually fewer and fewer add-ons to the cars. They come in bundles now. You don't really get the laundry list of, I want the luggage rack, and you don't really get to pick that as you used to many years ago. I think the key to that is that if you're going to create a baseline product, whether it's a car or an airplane or something that's a tangible, large, durable good, that it's all about the prioritization and sensitivity to that. As to what, again, if you try to understand the driver's perspective in a car, the seat, the visibility, there's a few other characteristics that you might say, this is the common thread. This is the areas of highest critical experience delivery. So let's concentrate on those, and probably the companies that do a better job of those highly sensitive areas will kind of garner the connection or the association or the allegiance of people. Because you can't do everything. And I think we've all, as consumers, we've kind of become, people laugh about the closing of the door thing with cars, but that was all just an ultimate test of any number of quality characteristics. And actually car companies started to test for that. They became very sensitive to that kind of thing.
Oh, it is so completely true too, by the way. Yeah. It can be fabulous in every way, but even if it closes just fine, but it sounds tinny.
Got a high clunk factor, you're kind of done.
Yeah. Okay, before I get to, there's a couple of questions on our sort of 8 words that I want to ask you, but I thought for this audience, especially for you, this would be good. How closely has your educational background prepared you for what you do now? You have a degree in engineering.
Yep.
It sounds like that it prepared you well, but
no, I think it prepared me well on a couple of fronts. I mean, I'm a consumer like everybody else, so I live in the world like everyone else. I think the tools of that curriculum taught me to be kind of an analytical thinker. Like, show me what we know, and then we'll try to solve the problem. And sometimes